Greetings once again everyone. I love testing out ultra bright aperture lenses, especially wide angle ones, so check out this new lens from ZY Optics really piqued my interest, their new Mitakon 20mm f/0.95. It's a manual focus lens for mirrorless camera systems, so that's Sony E, Nikon Z, Fuji X and Canon RF mounts, and it offers an APS-C sized image circle. Here's what you get when shooting on a full frame sensor. Surprisingly good coverage, actually. Its ambitious parameters mean that its price of $400 could be fairly reasonable if the lens turns out to be any good. I'd like to thank ZY Optics for sending me a copy of this lens for evaluation, although as usual this is a totally independent review, and even if the lens turns out to have soft image quality, it'll still be something useful and fun to play with. Just look at these images, a lovely wide angle, the full frame equivalent of about 30mm, combined with that bright aperture lead to some pretty spectacular images with dramatically out of focus backgrounds, if you have the patience to focus manually, that is, of course. The lens itself is a little big for an APS-C optic, and at about 600 grams or nearly 1.5 pounds, it's weighty too. At the rear we get the aperture ring, which turns with gentle clicks at each f-stop, and those f-stops are evenly spaced, just the way I like it for stills photography. However, the rear of the lens is very wide, which means that if you're using a really tiny camera, like my little A5100 here, then you might have some issues mounting it onto a tripod, and the aperture ring may jam against your mounting point, depending on a tripod of course. In front of that comes the metallic manual focus ring. It turns very smoothly and precisely for focusing at f/0.95, which is great news. Less encouraging is that I found it had just a little bit of play to it. On my copy of the lens at least, you had to turn it a millimeter or two before it would actually engage and make your adjustment, but still I found the lens easy to focus. And here's the kind of focus breathing you can expect from this lens, just a moderate amount here, nothing too worrying. The lens comes with quite a deep plastic hood, and its filter size is 72mm. It doesn't have any kind of image stabilization or in-body electronics, and it is not weather sealed. Overall, perfectly acceptable build quality here for a lens in this class. I liked the evenly spaced aperture ring, and more importantly, the focus ring is precise enough for shooting at f/0.95. Okay, let's take a look at image quality now. I'll be testing the lens on my Sony A5100 camera with its 24MP APS-C sensor. No in-camera corrections are available with this lens. At f/0.95, in the middle of the frame, sharpness is fairly good, actually, although contrast isn't so great, and there's a touch of ghosting on horizontal contrasting edges. Over in the corners, unsurprisingly, the image is softer and darker, but you can still make out what's going on there quite well. This is a better performance than usual for an inexpensive f/0.95 lens, especially such a wide angle one. If you stop down to f1.4, then we don't get any more sharpness, but we do see more brightness and a little more contrast. Back in the middle, we see quite a bit more contrast now. However, stop down to f2 and resolution and contrast now leap upwards into perfection. Corner image quality at f2 is about the same though, but stop down again to f2.8 for a burst of new sharpness to emerge over there, and at f4, image quality from corner to corner is fantastically good, with only traces of colour fringing to be seen. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11, although at f16, softness begins to emerge due to the effect of diffraction. Still, for a little $400 lens with pretty ambitious parameters, this image quality isn't bad at all. Its images are quite usable at f/0.95 in my opinion, if not impressive, and stop down the aperture for plenty of sharpness and contrast across the whole image frame. Let's take a look at vignetting and distortion now. As you can see, distortion is very well corrected optically for such a wide angle lens. Vignetting is certainly visible in the corners at f/0.95, although it does at least fall quite gently, so it's not as disturbing in your images as it could be. Stop down to f2 or f2.8 for those corners to brighten up. That's as bright as the corners get. The lens can focus down to about 30cm, average or so for an optic this wide. Close-up image quality is just a little softer than at normal distances, but still not bad. f1.4 looks punchier, f2 looks excellent. Let's see now how the lens performs against bright light. Here is a chink in its armour. At f0.95, bright points of light cause loads of flaring, with a bright rainbow pattern, even when those lights are slightly out of the picture. Stop down to f1.4 for quite a major improvement, but offset light can still cause some glaring, so I recommend using the lens's hood. And while we're working in the dark, let's take a look at coma levels. This appears to be one of the lens's biggest weaknesses. It's really strong at f0.95, which will limit your work in darkness. At f1.4, it's just as bad. Stop down to f2 and it begins to settle down. At f2.8, it's much improved, and at f4, gone. Still quite a misstep overall. Stop down to f5.6 and we begin to see sun stars, which get much stronger at f11 and f16, so at least those look quite pretty. Now let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh, and I'm impressed here. Not only does the lens offer quite deeply out of focus backgrounds, but they nearly always look lovely and soft and even, with no serious issues. Cat's eye specular highlight shapes are visible in image corners though. And finally, related to bokeh comes longitudinal chromatic aberration. It's somewhat noticeable at f0.95 but not high. It's still there at f1.4 but essentially gone at f2 and f2.8. Overall then, well, I've tested a lot of low budget f0.95 lenses, and they nearly always come with the same serious optical pitfalls like crazy softness, poor close-up image quality, longitudinal CA, all kinds of problems. While this Mitakon lens may not be the sharpest thing in the world at brighter apertures, it does still casually sidestep most of those common issues, and most of all, it offers usable image quality at f0.95 and fabulous image quality from corner to corner at f4, making it really useful as well as lots of fun. Be aware of that heavy coma though, if you're shooting nighttime scenes. But if you're up for the challenge of manually focusing an f0.95 lens and you want the resulting images to look nice, then for its price, this thing is pretty good. Blah blah blah, thanks for watching, blah 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 Patreon, blah blah blah, link in the description below, and thank you to all my supporters on Patreon who are making such a big difference to keeping these free lens reviews going.